All right, so now it's time for the next talk. You don't have to listen to me anymore. So I want to welcome up on stage Marina Diez from 3 Cup Games. Welcome. Thank you.
Hello, it's so nice to be here again. So today I'm going to talk about emotional game design, holding your hand through the computer, which is the thing that I've been working on for the last couple of years, not only as a consultant or as a game designer, but also through my company, 3 of Cups Games, that it's an ethical and diverse games studio based in London in the UK. So let's get this started. So this is me. If you don't know me, as I said, I'm the CEO of my company, 3 of Cups Games, and I'm also at the moment the lead game designer of the game Dordogne by the French studio SGC21. And sometimes I'm a game design consultant, and recently I've also started making films. And you're gonna understand later on why this fact is important. So first of all, this talk is very special to me because normally I never explain how did I get into emotional game design, and maybe you as game designers, or if you are interested in game design, maybe you didn't hear much about it, but it's not as new as it seems. It's only that I think that now more people are kind of giving it a definition. And at the same time as this talk is about game design, it's also a talk about finding your own voice in the games industry. And I say this because when I started in the industry 5 years ago, I kind of couldn't find my place in some way. I'm a game designer, and sometimes for being a game designer, that means that you also need to be a technical game designer. And honestly, not everyone enjoys doing that within a team as a game designer. So as it happens often in the games industry, for example, if you are not happy working with maths, you think that you are not able to be a game designer just because of this. So for myself, a way of kind of making myself fit in the games industry was kind of building my own thing within my niche, which was emotional game design. And I discovered that I was interested in emotions because for me it was much easier to work with mechanics if I knew beforehand the kind of emotions I wanted to evoke in the player, instead of just working with mechanics and loops since the very beginning with the team. So first I wanted to talk about Aiko, which is this game from 2001 by Fumito Ueda. And it's because the first time when I saw this image, for me it resonated a whole lot with what I kind of want to achieve in the games industry through emotional game design. And you know, like you can see here, it's just like one character giving the hand to the other, but this whole game, basically, this is the main mechanic. This is what you do in the game, besides exploring and doing a bunch of other stuff that is just like meaningful but not mechanical. So this moment for me, when I saw this, I felt that this is what I want to do in the games industry, to create warm mechanics. So I wanted to talk about a bit of the work of Fumito Ueda that, as I said, for me was very important. This is an image from Shadow of the Colossus in 2005, and it's called design, well, as Fumito Ueda defined it, is design by subtraction, which basically means games reduced to their essence. And also this kind of has related concepts like minimalism or coherentism. And as I say here, like the minimum necessary to express a certain concept or to convey a certain experience. And for me, that was basically reducing the experience to emotion. Like when you take away everything in a game and you just have the mechanics and the story, like what you get is basically the emotions you evoke in the player. And that's how I started working with emotional game design. Then, coming back to the roots, basically this slide, I built it after spending 1 week with my team in France last week, which was really nice because after 2 years working together, we just met now. So basically, coming back to the roots was a moment where working in Dordogne, we had like a complicated scene that we didn't know how to resolve. And it was an emotional scene that basically, it was very important because it was the opening scene. This is not under NDA, by the way, but a little bit, but it's fine. So basically, we needed to find cool mechanics for an opening scene, which is really important because basically it's how you engage the player for the first time, right? And if you don't nail that well, it's a big mess. So we had like pretty cool mechanics. It was, like lots of stuff to do in the first minute, and then basically I said, this is not feeling right. We need to come back to the roots. And the creative director was there like, yeah, we should, but we didn't know what to do. And basically in the end, we understood what we needed was not to create very complicated mechanics for that moment that was emotional. What we needed to do was to work with our narrative designer pretty close and the audio designer and our artists to create meaningful interactions in there, but not necessarily a complicated mechanic. And that's what I meant when I said in that meeting that we needed to come back to the roots, because pretty often we get immersed in game design that I need to do this, I need to do that, I put more of this, but as it's very meaningful with Fumito Ueda and the subtraction, because sometimes we don't need more, we need less actually. So this is for me a little bit how I work sometimes with emotional game design, that it doesn't mean necessarily to have more of everything, but that what this little we have, it's important for the whole game. Then I call this the basics. This is how I also get into emotional game design through this amazing book that I really recommend. Is How Games Move Us by Catherine Isbister, and it's called Emotion by Design. And it has a couple of cool examples of how emotional game design is not new at all. It's just that it had a different definition. So basically, this is how I very much got inspired into emotional game design, and how I saw that other game designers were also doing different things that was not what in the games industry normally we define as a game designer, or we didn't think that a game designer could work like that. That the thing is that, and I think that the goal of this talk as well is to tell you all that there is not one way of making game design, but like everyone is able to do amazing stuff, and it doesn't mean that you need to have the same methodology as I do, that you can have your own. Like the important thing is communication and kindness, and basically listen to everyone in the team. That doesn't mean that everyone is a game designer. It means that the game designer listens to everyone, and then we adapt what we hear in the meeting. And then finally, how to make emotional game design. So this is more or less kind of the pattern that I follow when I work with emotional game design in teams. Basically, emotions before mechanics, that we have a good meeting at the beginning that is very long with the creative director or whoever is in charge of the vision of the game. And we see together the kind of emotions we want to have generally in the game. And then after that, depending on what kind of game we are making, we also figure out the emotions scene by scene that we want to evoke in the player, which is very, like, normally this looks like a spreadsheet or something like that, and it's a work that we do, for example, in Dordogne with the narrative designer. That's how we've been working for the last year, and it worked pretty well. Like, basically, in some ways, it's kind of making a film. It's not super far. And it's really exciting because you get to work with everyone, and it's not like you are alone by yourself making mechanics. And then, again, close work with the narrative designer, the audio, and the art, that I will be going in depth with this later on. And then audio, lights, cameras, and controls. That controls is one of the things that I noticed in the last 2 years, how important they are. And as a game designer, sometimes you don't, it depends on the team a lot, that it's not your job at all to work on the controls, but it's fantastic if you are able to figure out what kind of controls your mechanics are gonna have, because that's through the controls, and the controller is basically the input through which the player is gonna feel the game. So, I mean, for me, as a game designer, it helps a lot that I know how to map controls, and, like, I look at other games for inspiration for doing my controls as well. And then I have a couple of examples. So basically, this is PTSD. This is a game that I made in 2019 for my master project in uni. And basically, it's a game about post-traumatic stress disorder and how people with post-traumatic stress disorder feel in different situations in their day-to-day. And I think here is where I noticed that the way I like making game design was for myself different, because what I enjoyed the most about designing this game was basically to play around in Unity and like experimenting with the lights, the cameras, the audio, the controls, everything. So it was kind of like a playground for me, even if I'm not like, I don't know how to code super well, but it doesn't matter because the important thing for me here was to experiment with all the elements that I could without needing to put so much intricate code here, and that helped me a lot. This is another game that I made as well during a visit to some friends in Oslo. And basically, it's an experience of going in the snow in the night, seeing the northern lights, and it has as a background Tibetan bowls that it's quite relaxing. And the goal of this before the pandemic was to create some sort of installation with it. And this is another example of how I explored in this way of making game design. Basically, I just opened Unity and started experimenting around with this, besides writing down the kind of things I wanted the player to do here. That this experience is much more kind of a walking simulator experience, but PTSD, for example, was, in the other hand, an experience that you could do more mechanical stuff. So we go to experiment. That basically, when I see sometimes game designers starting in the games industry, it's pretty common that they think they need to know everything, and they need to work as everyone else, as they think how everyone else works, which sometimes is not true. Not all the game designers just work with loops and technical stuff. And I say this because I think that especially for marginalized game developers, it's quite important to know that there are other ways for making game design, because sometimes with technical stuff, we are not all lucky enough to maybe go to school for doing this stuff, or we don't know how to start. But the important thing is start, and this comes with experiment. Open Unity and start designing your games. Designing your games can come through paper or can come through opening Unity and doing stuff. It doesn't matter, but the important thing is to do it, and that's why I have here experiment. Then this is something that I've been doing in my last projects, the emotional game design board. It looks a bit messy, and sometimes when the whole team, if we are 30, comment here, it's pretty horrible. But at the same time, it's quite fun to do this with everyone and to figure out the kind of emotions we want to put in our game. So like here you can see like a bunch of stuff that is not quite legible, but that's on purpose because it's under NDA. But here you can see a couple of references that we took for the game. This is about Dordogne. And basically, this is all the stuff we did in emotional game design. That basically was since figuring out how we wanted the maps in the game to look like and what kind of emotions the player wanted to have when opening those maps. Or, for example, besides our game design pillars, to have as well our emotional pillars. That's also something that we work on in this board. And this tool is called Miro, and I recommend it a whole lot because you can see it's quite visual, and basically everyone can see this in the team. So even people that don't understand the emotional game design, or they are not game designers at all, they see this and they understood perfectly what we meant with emotion. And this precisely helped a lot audio department and the art department. So now we go to audio, lights, cameras, controls, and narrative design. So the first I wanted to mention was What Remains of Edith Finch. I don't know if everyone have played this game, but in terms of control, it's pretty amazing what they achieved. That basically, this is also part of emotional game design. And in the case of Edith Finch, they mapped on like they had a pattern for 30 different types of controls, and they did one thing that is called trusting the player. That basically doesn't matter the interaction you think you're doing. Like, for example, for me, grabbing one thing is pressing A, and for you it's pressing B. But they, with an engineered system, they kind of achieved that it doesn't matter if I press A or I press B, but I'm gonna be, as a player, always right. And sometimes as a game designer, you could think, okay, then where is the, like, maybe it's not challenging enough. But like all the contrary, everyone that I know that played Edith Finch thinks that the controls were amazing, and that makes you feel the game much better, because a game like especially in the narrative design, in the narrative games, what you want is to experiment and feel the story and get to know the characters. You don't want to be pissed off with the controls and how shitty they feel. So that's why it's very important to map your controls well when you design your mechanics, especially if you're doing emotional game design. Then the cameras. I think this is all of this stuff when I talked with a friend of mine 2 months ago that basically we had an informal talk. She is the CEO at As2 Games. And it was quite surprising because she asked me like, but why, like, what's different with emotional game design than with normal game design? And basically I said to her that the difference is all of these, the cameras, the lights, the audios. Like sometimes, or at least in the last decades, it was quite normal that the game design was separate from the rest of the teams. And every team was feeling like the same. So basically, the philosophy of emotional game design is to be able to work with everyone else. And that's why, for me, it's important to, as a game designer, to kind of have at least some basic knowledge of all of this. Like we have here cameras, and you can see two very different frames. Like basically here is Life is Strange, and then we have Spider-Man, Miles Morales. So you can see here that through the cameras, the game designer is able to kind of make their mechanics much better because we know what we are gonna see in the screen. So when you are able to tweak this yourself as a game designer, the result is even better. Like my friend from Us2 said that for her, this was more the role of a creative director, and could be, but I also think that it doesn't hurt to have some knowledge on this. And I said before that filmmaking for me was important just because of this precisely, that in the last couple of months, working in my different projects, I noticed how good was for me to have more knowledge in filmmaking. And I was quite surprised because when I met with other friends from the film industry, they were very, very, very inspired by the game industry. But I noticed that with my friends from the games industry, we almost never spoke about cinema. So, yeah, you know, like, this is kind of a thing that really surprised me. And for me, it's important because it's quite obvious that the emotions that we evoke in players as game designers here are quite different. And in the case of Spider-Man, more than Life is Strange, the camera is a vital element from the mechanic of basically hanging in the city and flying around. Then audio. I think Control for me is one of the best audios I ever seen in video games. Playing Control gives me nausea because it's so good that I feel really, really anxious about it. And basically, for me, it was very surprising how the amazing atmosphere that the audio designers created in this game. And in emotional game design, even if you are not an audio designer, having, again, like some notions of tweaking audio, or at least knowing what you expect for your mechanics and being able to work with the audio team is quite useful. Because then the audio team is going to understand you, and you're going to be able to actually explain to the audio team how the mechanic is going to feel in that ugly scene, and find that momentum that makes games awesome. Then this is the case of Dordogne again, narrative design plus game design. I was super lucky that I have very good synergies with our narrative designer, but I think that it's been an amazing discovery to be able to work together so closely. Like basically for this project, we just opened a spreadsheet, and chapter by chapter in the game, we were writing the different scenes and putting down, again, as I explained, the emotions, and being able to give feedback to each other. Like basically he was writing the story, and from the story he wrote, I was working on my mechanics and with the emotions that we convey with the creative director. And I think that the result is quite different from other projects that I work on that didn't have this type of relationship between departments. And then lights. Lights sometimes, you know, like maybe you think it's something silly, but basically this is a scene from Gone Home. And I think that again, being able to know where you want your lights, it's quite meaningful. Like when you see a film, for example, like everything in the frame is not there because of whatever. It's there because it's important. to be there. Sometimes can happen that maybe there are some stuff that are just like there, but it's not very common. And I think in games it's kind of the same, but in small teams, I think that unconsciously we are able to work on this. But I think it would be great if we consciously talk about this and we know where do we want our points of light perfectly placed when we make our games. So how to get more inspiration for emotional game design? Like, honestly, for me, the last 2 years were very difficult in terms of getting inspired for my emotional game design, because I get all my inspiration from being outside and traveling and seeing my friends and living experiences. Like, it's very complicated to create emotions and experiences for others if you don't live those yourself. So, of course, you don't need to live all experiences, but it's really refreshing when you get to go outside and talk to other friends and learn from others, and not only restricting yourself to other games that, for me, for example, is quite meaningful, as I said, films, but also music, even art and literature. So that's how I would say you get more inspiration for emotional game design. And that's all for me for now. Like, I think there is room for questions, but yeah, this is in a nutshell how I work with emotional game design in my day-to-day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that amazing talk. If you have any questions, please step up to the microphone here at the center aisle. If you're watching from home, please write your questions on Discord. So what questions do you have? Don't be shy. Do we have anything on Discord? Do we know? Come on, I know that someone here has a question. There we go. There's always someone who's brave.
Hello.
Hello.
You talk a lot about sort of designing from an emotion, and I would like to hear a little bit more about that. So, like, say I have a scene in my game, and I want the player to feel happy. Like, where do I go from there? What happy is obviously maybe not precise enough. Like, what's the next step?
So depends on the kind of genre we are working on, of course. But basically, like, if we have a scene that we say we need to feel happy, and I think that we need to work with if it's a narrative game, with a narrative design. I mean, every game, I think, should have a minimum of narrative work behind, because we are kind of telling a story always. So we are kind of giving a message to the player always. So I think that when we say, for example, happy is quite a difficult emotion, but it would be, for example, a combination of mechanics and games, depending of our interactions, that makes you feel that emotion. Like, I don't know, I don't know which example to take, but for example, in Dordogne, we have several scenes with kayaking. And for example, when we want to say, I want the player to feel happy, we kind of work a lot with audio on that to kind of find cool sounds that evoke you the emotion of feeling happy, or warmth interactions that, for example, could be from touching things in the game, from basically working with dialogue to, express some reactions from the player, that basically human beings reproduce a lot what they see in others. So that's why, for example, when you see someone laughing a lot, that many times you start laughing yourself as well. It's because you are kind of reproducing that in yourself. So when we do that in a game, it's the same effect in the end. Like, when we see someone having a warm smile in a game, many times we also smile. So that's how we work with emotional game design. We try to reproduce that.
Thank you.
All right. I see more people having questions. Awesome.
Hello, hello. Question from Discord for emotional game design. You said how close you work with audio departments. Do you also work as close with art departments?
Yes. Basically, in the case of Dordogne, that it's a very good case because it's a very artsy game. Our meetings are with the our team present all the time. And basically, at the same time, we are working on the mechanics with the creative director. They also sketch these things for showing to us. And sometimes stuff that made lots of sense in game design didn't make sense at all when they sketched that. So we need to change the whole concept. So it basically is many times something that feed each other.
Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for the talk, very interesting. I just wanted to know, could you define a bit more exactly what emotional design is?
Yeah, so basically, traditional game design normally is kind of all about the mechanics, and unconsciously, game designers didn't take into account the kind of emotions they wanted to evoke in the different scenes, especially when you're working with very big teams. It's not something that normally is, like companies take into account. But in this case, I was lucky enough to work with smaller teams, like of 30 or 40 people, that we had time to basically start the mechanics from we want to make players feel frustrated here, or we want players to feel happy here, and then work on mechanics for reproducing that, not all the way around, and then figuring out, oh, this mechanic actually makes people feel frustrated. But we try to make that frustration from the fact of consciously wanting to create that.
Thank you.
What other questions do you have? Yeah.
So frustration and you had another word you just used, and what it can be. Is it quite simple to understand? But do you ever run into emotions that are very complex and it's hard for you to communicate to the rest of the team? You had one example, how it feels to walk in the snow under like Northern Lights, and if you haven't been there, how do you do to communicate this to a team for you to work on that?
So basically, this is a very good question, because if we are within a meeting with other people and we say, for example, we want to create a game in the snow, and I didn't went specifically myself into the snow, it's a problem. But also, other people would have gone to the snow probably. So like basically is the nice thing about this, that is very collaborative. So like we can all inspire each other for doing this. And sometimes also when there is no global pandemics around, you are even able to go to places where you get inspired from that feeling. Like for example, in the case of Dordogne, Dordogne happens in the French region of Dordogne. So it was really, really inspiring and good being able to go there last week with the whole team to get inspiration. Because, for example, there was a scene that we had kayak drowning, and then we noticed that there were no rivers in Dordogne that were able to make a kayak drowning. So that's a problem for the game design and the narrative design that we couldn't have solved if we were not being there. So yeah, basically is again listening a lot to others, and if you're not able to go to the place, sometimes helps a lot to see videos that these days we are lucky that we have access to lots of resources like that. But it's, in my opinion, it's always better if you're able to go there yourself, but if you are not, stuff like that is pretty useful as well, like films or videos or sounds, and of course the help of others.
And what about PTSD?
PTSD is a good question. It's because in that moment I suffer PTSD. So in the case of PTSD, I was my own inspiration. It was like very difficult to create as a game because for that game I was at the times living in London, and one of the scenes basically is to feel anxiety in the tube. That is something that happened to me for years, like not anymore, but in that moment, yes. And in order to be able to in that moment to create that experience, I often went myself to the tube in London, and being there that I felt terrified. But I wanted to kind of really make this game because I thought I was able to help other people if I made this kind of game. So in that case, I was able to go to there because it's something that I myself experienced. But if we are working on a mental health game, for example, and it's not myself who suffered the thing, the work would be very different. Like I think we would need someone that from like their own experience are able to tell us how is it, and in the case of mental health games, to work with professionals, of course.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you have any special methods how to verify that you're hitting the right emotions with the players, for example, during playtesting and such?
Yeah, basically, that's a very good point. That for all of these, that no game designer, technical, emotional, whoever has, we are not God. So we can make mistakes, and sometimes this is not exact science. So as you said, through iteration and testing with a couple of players, we are already able to see if it makes any sense, or we need to improve it, or right away throw it to the bin. That it doesn't matter. Sometimes we throw ideas to the bin and it's okay. But basically lots of testing, like lots of testing since the very first day. In the case of Dordogne, for example, for verifying this, we create, at the same time we produce the game, we create small prototypes of every chapter. That it's something that it's additional work. But in the long run, it's very effective because we are able to identify problems very quickly. And especially when we play with emotions, we are able to see this is emotional, or this is really like is making us feel cold. So, yeah.
And do you watch the players, or are you interviewing them about what emotions they go through during the playtest, or any special way of finding out how they feel?
Yeah, normally, basically, when playtesting is happening, we don't intervene with the players, but we ask the players afterwards how did they feel, because also this is the magic of emotional game design. Maybe we are aiming for happiness, and the same thing that we understand as happy for other people is more like other emotion that is not exactly happy. And that's okay as well, but through the playtesting and asking people, we are able to make it as exact as we can, because we are never gonna make it perfect, and we know that.
Thank you.
Hi. First and for all, thank you for a very good and interesting talk. It was great hearing about.
Thank you so much.
Didn't know much about this. What I would like to ask is there some emotions that you feel are more difficult to depict than others? And also, how do you go about when you have to design a feature for something that you are currently very far from? Say, for example, you're having a horrible day, and you come into work and you have to design something happy. How do you go about that?
Basically, I'm going to start by the end. When I'm feeling horrible, I think that everyone should be able to say at work that you are feeling horrible that day and not work at all, because it's very difficult in creative industries to do your work well if you're feeling very bad. And if I need to work anyway, it's basically, it's very complicated. But I would say that when that happened, I just get inspired by other media, and I try to do my job as better as I can. But ideally, when I'm not feeling very well, it's for me, it's anyway difficult to do any of this work, because this kind of work requires a lot emotionally as well, and it's lots of talk with the team. So when you're not feeling great, it's complicated to work with these methods. And then I forgot the first part. I'm sorry. Can you repeat it?
Yes, that was. Is there some emotions that you've had to work with that are more difficult than others?
Yeah, I found very difficult to. I found easier to create sad emotions than happy emotions. I don't know why, but when you are able to, when you need to create some tools for sad emotions, it's kind of easier, because you also have your own coping mechanisms with that, so you can also get inspired by that. But with happy emotions, I find it difficult, because for some people happiness is quiet happiness, for other people is being very loud or very dynamic. So I think that that's the trickiest part for me.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any more questions? We have a few more minutes. All right.
Creating or making people feel positive emotions like happiness and like excitement and stuff is something I think most games want, because that makes the player want to play more. What do you do when you want to create, like make the player feel frustration and anger and these kind of emotions that often, you know, make players want to turn off the game and not play anymore, especially frustration, like that if you're, yeah, how do you go about making a scene that where the player is supposed to feel frustrated and also not turn off the game?
That's a very good question, and I didn't figure out that yet, but I'm working on it as well. Like recently we were precisely working on a very frustrating scene, and it was one of these scenes that basically you feel so nervous that you need to open your house's door, and you have the keys in your hand, but you feel very nervous, and it's the typical situation that you're gonna open the door, and then the keys fall, you're gonna take the keys, and then you bump your head with whatever thing, so you get extremely angry. So I don't know if the players are gonna switch off the console when that happens, because it's gonna happen a few times in order to feel the frustration of the player. But I think that it's definitely important that we create some sort of that, because otherwise if it's a bit like there is a dissonance there, if you are kind of creating a scene that is frustrating and you know that through the narrative design that the character that you are embodying is not feeling well. Like, it's not possible that you have a character that is walking in Unity, like super happy and opening the door like, nothing happened. It doesn't make any sense. So I think that maybe before getting the player very frustrated, I would say that ideally we create other kind of emotional progression beforehand in order to get the player into the flow of feeling, of knowing that in this game is gonna be a bit like that. So they know and they think, okay, this is part of the game, and it also comes with balance of the mechanics as well. Like if you make it too frustrating, it's not gonna work. So that also is a very good example with the playtesting, that it's important to see until when we are able to stretch the player's patience, and that only works through playtesting, and we are never gonna get it perfect because everyone is different. But I think more or less would be like that.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for your talk. And for someone who would like to convey more emotions in their art, what tips would you have for them?
So I think that for me, what it helps a lot is to take a step back from my work and to get inspired by other stuff. Like sometimes can be other media, and sometimes can be simply go outside and look around. Like basically, I think that game dev is a lot of looking around. Like for example, when I was talking about the controls, when you have something more organic, you can feel it. And in order to get organic things in arts and in creative industries, I think you need to really look around in the real world, because you're reproducing some sort of experience that you want the player feel familiar with. So I think you need to take real examples in order to get inspired. So basically is that, and then at the same time not getting frustrated if you don't get it quite there yet at the first attempts, because it's tricky.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, we have another question. Good.
First of all, thank you for the amazing talk. I would like to ask about the pacing of different emotions. Like maybe there are ordering effects. If happiness happens before sadness or after sadness, it would be completely different emotional impact. So I wonder, what's your experience with the pacing issue, or yeah, like
with the pace or
pacing?
Sorry.
Yeah, like how do you order different emotions, if that matters for you?
Basically, I think I work a lot with narrative games, but in this case, what helps me a lot is to have a conversation with the narrative designer. Like, it's very useful because they are going to know exactly how slow or fast the game is going to be, and how we can kind of schedule the different emotions in the different scenes. So for me, lately, I have worked that a lot. And then also, that's why I was saying before that in Unity it was for me very helpful to just open it without fear. It was very scary anyway, but without fear, because through experimentation in the engine, you are able to get better at finding those momentums, those kind of aha moments that you have in games. And if you're not experienced a little bit in getting, into that flow and experiment around with every element that Unity or whatever engine you're using gives you, it's trickier to get it right. So I think for me, that's the best thing, to kind of experiment in order to see how can I pace better my emotions for my games.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, do you have any tips for a game writer or narrative designer?
Tips for narrative designers? So I think that in order for emotion, I don't have as much experience in narrative design. That, for example, I have more experience, like not in games, but when I write my own films, what worked for me basically is to imagine the action in my head and kind of finding inspiration from other visual arts, like videos and things like that help me to get right that emotion that I'm chasing. Like, for example, the last film I worked with, it was a film that I recorded with my mom, and we were talking about herself moving from the north part of Spain to Madrid, and it was a bit of a kind of a story that for her was a little bit funny, but at the same time you could figure out in the subtext that it was a bit traumatic for her. And for getting that right is not super different from when you need to get that right in the script for a game. Basically, what I thought, what I played there with was with the pacing. That I was exactly talking about that just before, and kind of scheduling the different moments one after the other one to kind of create slowly that emotion that I wanted to chase. That in this case was finding that solution for expressing through the camera that it was a story that looks, like funny in the outside, but it has lots of emotional baggage in the bottom. And more or less, I don't know if I did give you a very good tip, but for me is what it worked, like imagine the story in my head and scheduling as best as I could the emotions that I was chasing.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, looks like there are no more questions. Going once, going twice. All right, thank you so much for this excellent talk and all your great answers to all of the questions. It was really nice to hear your opinions and your insights. So a big round of applause.
Thank you so much.